You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, good to be back with you all again on the Mighty Blue podcast. We're up to episode number 470 of the show, though, of course, there haven't actually been 470 episodes. If you recall, last year I screwed up my attempt to podcast my Southwest Coast Path hike, so there is a gap of episodes to fill in about that hike. I am determined to do it, but I'm afraid that the time needed to do it has eluded me so far. I said I was going to do it, and I will. I just hope you're all patient. This week we have another pretty cool show lined up for you, with news about something happening next week that I'll get to in a moment. As I know I've mentioned on the podcast before, I generally loathe Facebook, but it's wonderful for several things. For me, remembering lost family and friends on Facebook is a very cathartic, very surprising experience. Also, it's a wonderful source for a podcaster looking for awesome stories to bring you all. Just a couple of weeks ago, I found today's guest, Nick Thatcher. His summit picture on Mount Katahdin is as good a summit picture as I've ever seen. Initially, I didn't know how much of the AT he'd done, and I couldn't work out his story until we spoke. What he told me was a story of determination, intelligent choices, and real grit. All in a young man in his early to mid-20s. Nick will be on in a moment. Then, in Emily Leonard's Happy Hiking, Emily is on the cusp of New Hampshire, pushing a muddy way through Vermont. By the way, thanks to all of you who wrote to me about whether or not you wanted me to podcast my Camino hike this May. Turns out, the vast majority of you do want me to, so now I'm going to go away, work it out, and make sure I don't cock it up again like I did on the Southwest Coast Path. I'm a lifelong learner at 72, so I'll sort it out. And then, of course, there's this. It was great to have Chris on the show last week from our sponsor TSX Challenge. TSX Challenge leads guided backpacking treks through the Sierra, Grand Canyon and beyond for all ages and experience levels. One thing I have noticed about their trips is that while they go to the big destinations, many of their hikes are to places I've never heard of. For example, in the Sierra, they have trips to Mount Goddard, Tehipite Valley, Hell for Sure, which is a great name, and Triple Divide. Chris told me that Tehipite Valley is a little bit like Yosemite Valley, but with no people. Having seen the hordes of people in Yosemite, I can't imagine what that would be like, but it sounds really cool. I remember even on our Mount Whitney hike, we visited spectacular, almost desolate places like Big Wet Meadow and Colby Lake, and for several days it felt like we had the entire mountains to ourselves. If a big hike out west is on your radar, consider making a visit to the TSX Challenge website for some ideas and inspiration. That's tsxchallenge.com. Even if you're planning your own hike, they may have some information that can help. If you do decide to join a guided trek, don't forget to use the code MIGHTYBLUE at checkout to save 10%. One last thing before we get on. I've got a very exciting secret to share with you all, but I'm going to have to wait for a few weeks before I can tell you. Just thought I'd put that out there. But let's get going and meet a very accomplished young guy. This is Nick Thatcher, or the painfully named Hotfoot. Our guest today posted his Katahdin picture on Facebook after his Appalachian Trail finish in 2024. And it was one of the best pictures I've seen on the brown sign. This is Nick Thatcher, or Hotfoot. Hey, Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm going to tell people in a minute why it was a great picture, but I'm not going to tell it straight away. We'll come to that later on. And you're Hotfoot. Why on earth are you Hotfoot?
Sure. So when I first attempted the Appalachian Trail as a thru-hike in 2023, my very first night on the AT, I was sitting at the second shelter on the trail, about 8 miles in, and I was sitting around having dinner at a picnic table, and somebody was boiling water, and to this day, I'm not really sure if it was a gust of wind or he was just talking with his hands, but I was right across from him, and he, at some point, the entire pot full of boiling water, and it was a good long boil, fell directly onto my ankle, and so I ended up getting like a second or a third degree burn, running from basically my shoe line all the way up about 2 or 3 inches,
Good
and
Lord.
just kept walking with the burn. Thankfully, the pain went away after a few days, but yeah, as soon as I kind of decided that I was going to keep going, people started calling me Hotfoot.
Nice. That's a well-earned trial on the first day. I bet you stay clear of that guy in the future, didn't you?
You know, it's funny you say that because he was actually like a wilderness first responder.
Oh,
And so he was able to help me take care of it, and he had like the actual burn cream, and so we were able to actually work together, and I hiked with him for like 2 more days until I got to Blairsville, and he pulled ahead a little bit.
well, if you're gonna get burned by somebody, it's pretty good to be burned by somebody with all the right gear in it. So I suppose that's not so bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was obviously an accident, and I don't hold him accountable
course,
or anything
of
like
course.
that. It was just that kind of stuff happens.
Oh yeah.
But
My,
at least it was a good story.
I got to tell you, mate, it doesn't happen that often in the first day or second day. That's that's a bit tough, isn't it? Really. So
Yeah.
So let's start with why you wanted to do the Appalachian Trail in the first place. How did it get onto your radar?
Yeah, so I have lived pretty much my entire life in central Pennsylvania. I'm about 45-minute drive from the halfway point,
Nice.
about 30 minutes from Duncannon, Pennsylvania. And so I've been on the AT a handful of times before I kind of realized that I wanted to do it in earnest. I'd always heard the name growing up. I sort of knew it was in this area. And then right around 2017, 2018, I went to college, and I sort of transitioned from someone who, when I was in high school, hated being outside, couldn't stand the bugs, hated being hot, hated being cold. It was the worst thing ever. And then I just went on a couple hikes, while I was a freshman in college, and realized like, oh, actually, this is kind of fun. And then over the course of my sophomore and junior year, I realized that I actually really, really like this. And then one day just started saying like, oh, maybe I could do the Appalachian Trail someday. It seems like fun. And then, of course, during the pandemic, everyone was stuck inside, and it was my junior going into senior year of college, and everything was just kind of shut down, and I wasn't really sure what to do with my life. So I ended up moving across the country to take a different job that in a different field than I had ever kind of worked in or really knew that I wanted to work in, and spent the summer in Minnesota. And just fell in love with it out there, and realized like, oh, if I can move across the country and do something totally different, then what's to stop me from doing the Appalachian Trail?
Wow.
And so after that, I sort of just set my mind to it that it's no longer a matter of someday; it's a matter of I'm going to do it, and here's how I'm going to make a plan to do it. And a few years later, I attempted it the first time.
So you have the idea to do it, and then you move across the country, and you think, yes, I can do this, but it's all very well and good once you say that, and even however determined you are, to actually turning it from thinking to do it to really wanting to do it to actually start the attempting to do one. Was there a defining moment for you when you thought, this is it, I'm committed to it now at this point?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because that transition process did not play out the way that I expected it to. Once I said that I was going to do it, I sort of ended up settling down after I graduated. I was working the typical office job. I figured that was what was right for me, and that's what I was going to end up doing. And one day I just sort of woke up and realized that if I keep going down this path, then my desire to do the trail is going to someday disappear, or I'm just going to have regrets about having never done it. And so I just woke up, and I remember I was sitting in the office, and I looked out and just saw like this was in, I believe, March, and I saw some of the leaves were starting to bloom on the trees out the window, and realized that that's where I want to be. I want to be outside right now. I want to be in those trees. I want to be experiencing this thing that I've always wanted to experience. And so I just decided at that point that I was originally gonna hike the Vermont Long Trail,
Right.
but one of my best friends convinced me to do the Appalachian Trail instead, because it was something I had been talking about forever.
Did he convince you and go with you, or did he convince you and you went by yourself?
No, it was more like he convinced me and then waved at me as I passed through.
Funny how that happens, isn't it? Really? Yeah.
It really is. But yeah, he convinced me that it was if this is something that I wanted to do, then I should just do it.
Absolutely.
And absolutely, it really only took him saying a few words for me to realize that's what I wanted to do.
And you're 25 now, is that right?
Yeah.
So what did you do out of college? You said you were living a life you weren't necessarily that happy with. What were you actually doing?
Sure. So I took a job with the Pennsylvania State Police. I was working for them for a few months, just kind of stereotypical run-of-the-mill bureaucratic kind of thing.
Right.
And then I transferred over to the Department of Transportation for a few months as well. And it was, I think it was pretty much during that transition period that I sort of realized that something felt off.
You think there's got to be something more to life than this?
Yeah. Like it was this big transition, this big promotion, and it just wasn't what I think I had built up in my head.
Right. So, so you had this dream. You actually quit the job, or did you go on a furlough? What did you do?
Yeah. So since I had basically I'd only been with that new promotion for a few months.
Right.
And so I asked if there was an opportunity to come back afterwards, and I just hadn't been there long enough. So I did end up having to walk away from everything for that.
You know, I don't know whether you listened to the show at all, but I love you guys who just prepare to quit. Because in my generation, that wasn't really available to us. You know, you quit and you went and did it, and now you've done the whole trail, which is fantastic. And so did you quit to prepare, or did you literally quit a couple of days before you went? You know, as to how do you fund it after you quit your job?
I just saved up every last dollar that I could.
Mm-hmm.
I had a little bit of savings left over, and once I made up my mind, I think I made it up about early to mid-April and left the first week of May.
Wow.
And so in that month, I think I had about four and a half thousand saved up, and literally stopped spending every single dollar that I could, and saved every single thing so that I could attempt it the first time.
And I bet you needed all the money, didn't you?
Well, you know, it's funny you say that, because the first time I attempted it, I ended up getting hurt beyond the burn, and so I wasn't able to finish, and so I had all this extra money I didn't even need anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're going to come to how that happened in a minute. And before you hit the trail, though, you said you like the idea of hiking and so on. Had you actually done much backpacking? Because backpacking and hiking are different things in many ways. So, what was your overnight experience like at that time?
Yeah, so when I was living in Minnesota, I first got into backpacking. I sort of made that transition slowly, did what I think I read an article online way back in like 2021 or something, talking about how to get into backpacking, and the suggestion of you go car camping, and then you hike around the area, and then maybe you'll do an overnight or 2 overnights. And so that was sort of the process that I had done. And so I had really only done, I honestly don't think I had done a single double overnight before. I had only done maybe 3, 4, 5 nights.
Did you get into that pretty quickly? Because, you know, it isn't easy for people. I mean, some people don't sleep for the first week. Some people don't sleep for the first month. So, you know, what was it like for you when you actually got out there and you get to your 3rd or 4th night? Were you buying into it pretty early on?
Yeah, I don't think it ever really bothered me that much, to be honest. I will say perhaps this is a little bit of TMI, but the whole bowel movement and being regular thing, I definitely didn't realize that was something that didn't happen for the first few days. And so I pretty much made it almost all the way to mountain crossings before I finally had to use the bathroom. And that was kind of weird for me, I won't lie.
Well, I guess shit happens, doesn't it, really? So
it does.
So 2023 was going to be your year. Tell us how those early months went, because you said you learned pretty quickly, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, between the literal trial by fire and everything else, it was definitely a bit of a learning experience. I learned that I didn't need as much as I thought I did. I had done so much research, especially since it was 2021 that I decided I was going to do it, and it wasn't until 23 that I ended up doing it. So I had all that time to kind of become an armchair backpacker and learn everything and go, oh, I kind of want to go lighter. I probably don't need this. I probably don't need that. But even still, without that experience, you know, you still are just naturally going to bring more than you need. And so I brought more clothes than I needed. I brought a stove and a pot, which I realized early on that I didn't actually like cooking on trail at all. Partly because I didn't like doing the dishes, and also partly because I just didn't really enjoy like the warm trail food as much. I loved town food, and that was something I figured out the first time. Was I would much rather go into town, buy an extra meal at a restaurant, and then pack that out and eat it, whether warm, like over a fire, or just cold. I'd rather do that than eat ramen.
So what was the weight of your pack when you first started then?
In 23, I believe it was about 14 or 15 pounds, right around there.
14 or 15 pounds? But that's without food
I
and water, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
right,
yeah.
okay. And
I'd say with food and water is probably closer to 25.
but that's still darn good. When I first went, 42 pounds was my pack weighed in at Amicalola. Ridiculous, I know. And did Georgia surprise you, or was it because I wasn't expecting Georgia? I found Georgia tougher than I ever expected it to be. How was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, going through it both times. The first time, it was definitely tough, but I think I was just so in love with the trail and so happy to be there and finally being able to experience this thing that I wanted to do for so long that I didn't notice it quite as much, and I also just really didn't have that much to compare it to.
Right.
But the second time, I definitely realized just how hard it was.
Yeah, no question.
And honestly, like between the first 100 miles and the second 100 miles, the difference is really quite incredible.
Well, you're kind of more into it, aren't you? By then, you've got your legs, and you're starting to feel it, and you're getting the rhythm of your hike and so on.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So when did you pick up your injury that actually pushed you off trail that year?
So 2023 was just, honestly, it was a whole year of injury. I was constantly cycling between Achilles tendonitis in either foot or the burn or a knee injury or something related to that. Like I was constantly hurt, but the actual injury that finally took me off was extensor tendonitis in my left foot, which is ironically the same foot that got burned.
Huh. It can't possibly be related, can it?
It can't possibly be related.
Oh,
no. So I got that. I started noticing around Central Virginia, or I guess like South Central Virginia, that my foot just started to feel sore all the time. And I had this methodology because I had started late in 23 that I needed to hurry up, and I just wasn't hurrying up in the very beginning. And so I figured I'd heard that Virginia was flat. And so I wanted to just push through Virginia as fast as I could, do all high teens, all low 20s, and never take time off and just keep going and just never stop. And, for some people that works, and it turns out for me that didn't work. Because right around Harrisburg, Virginia, the soreness just kept getting worse and worse, and I felt it in pretty much all of my joints. But I just ignored my feet because I had foolishly believed that your feet can't ever get injured. I was so worried about like the Achilles or the back of my knee or the knee itself or a meniscus tear, things like that. I had never heard of anyone having extensor tendonitis. I didn't even know what it was. But then one day, leaving Harrisburg, about 2 or 3 miles outside of town, there's this little gravel road that you pass on your way up to the top of, I think, Ricefield Shelter,
that's right,
I believe.
That's right, yeah.
And I was walking along that road, and I literally took one step, and just immediately it was like someone stabbed my foot. My pain went from like a 2 or a 3 to like a 5 or 6. Just instantly. And by the time I got to the shelter, it was probably closer to an 8. I was going less than a mile an hour, and it was dark, and it was just not a very enjoyable time. And then foolishly, I'll admit this, with retrospective, the next day I woke up and realized that I needed to go back to town and rest for at least 2 or 3 days.
Back to
hopefully
Harrisburg, you mean?
Back to Harrisburg,
Right,
yep.
yeah.
And so I wanted to go back and heal up because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to push forward for a long distance. And so I had 2 choices. I could either go back to that gravel road, which I had only passed that at night, so I honestly had no idea if anyone would if that was a regularly used road or not.
Sure.
Or I could push forward another 12 miles to the next road, which I knew was a real road, and I could definitely get a hitch back into town from that one. And so I weighed my options for a little bit, and to be honest, I think my thought process basically went to, if I go forward, I'll at least be making progress, and I won't be doing miles that I have to repeat. And so I decided that I was going to hike.
I love the way we rationalize dumb decisions, don't we?
Absolutely. I decided I was going to hike forward another 12 miles, and the first 6 were fine. It was like, the pain was a little bit there, but not too bad. But then the subsequent 6, same thing. I took one step, immediately the pain came back. And those last 6 miles were some of the worst hiking I've ever done in my entire life.
Well, not only the pain, though, I presume you must have known at that stage, or you must have thought at the very least, that the dream was over, because you'd done something and you hadn't been able to sort of complete it the way it was. Did you think then that you were off, or did you think, well, I'll take a couple of days off and I'll get back in a few days' time?
So I got to the Allegheny Trail sign. And then like right past that, there's a downhill that leads to a stream, and then there's a shelter right after that.
Okay.
And I got to that sign, and I just remembered thinking, I can't fathom walking one more mile.
Yeah.
How the heck am I going to walk? And I think Parisburg is like it's not even mile 700, so there was over 1,400 miles to go.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine walking one, let alone 1,400. And so I just, in that moment, was just so emotionally distraught. And I remember going down that hill and having to take a rest every 30 steps and literally just sit there for a few minutes. And every time I would sit down, I would definitely tear up a little bit, just knowing that like this just isn't, it's not happening. And I feel like walking is such a fundamental part of being a human.
Absolutely.
And to have walked so far and felt so capable, and then suddenly it's ripped away from you, was a little bit traumatizing for sure. But then even when I got to Parisburg, I still was clinging on to this hope that I was just gonna be a few more days, and I would get back on the trail and I would heal back up. I'd recovered from Achilles tendonitis and both of my Achilles at that point. Like, this was just another case of something like that. I would be fine, just ice it, rest it, and everything would be okay. And it wasn't. After about 4 or 5 days in Parisburg, I realized that I was either going to spend the entire rest of my AT budget sitting in a hostel in Virginia, or I could go home and recover and then do some kind of flip. And so that's what I ended up doing, is I went home and decided I was going to do a flip.
Okay, but before we get to that, I just want to tell you that as an aside, and I didn't mention this to you the other day, I'm going to mention it now. Parisburg has a thing for me, because climbing up out of Parisburg in 2014, I got bitten by a dog, and that knocked me off the trail because I contracted cellulitis, a bacterial infection of the skin. So when you said you coming out of Parisburg, I felt your pain straight away. So I knew what you're talking about. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So you went home. How did the recovery go? Did you think you might get back out there in 23? Because you talked about doing a flip. I mean, how was it?
I mean, I was just as convinced when I came home that I was going to be able to do it as I was in Virginia, thinking that I was just going to need a few more days. I was just as confident, just as assured that it was going to happen. And then the first week passed and I didn't feel any better. The second week passed and I didn't feel any better. The third week passed and I still didn't feel any better. And I basically stopped icing my foot because it wasn't doing anything. I stopped. I became extremely nihilistic and just sort of stopped caring as much about the recovery, because it's like, oh, it's never going to end.
Sure. By the way, what did your doctor say?
So I went to the doctor when I got back to Pennsylvania, and they said it was extensor tendonitis and that I should ice it and treat it, and that if it's not better in about 3 weeks, then I should consider potentially going to physical therapy over it, just in case it was worse than tendonitis, if it was like tendinosis or something and I had really hurt myself. But I, being as stubborn as I am, decided that, oh no, I just need a couple more days, and then a couple more days, turned into a couple more days and a couple more days, and it was almost 6 or 7 weeks before I finally was able to really solidly walk on it. And I went for a hike and still felt it. And then I ended up going to, there's a theme park right around the corner from me, Hershey Park, which I walked around there all day with my family and felt it a little bit, but was still able to walk. And so it was at that point that I made up my mind, okay, I'm going to leave. But unfortunately, after this point, it had been basically 2 months since I got injured, and I already started late.
Yeah.
So it's, I think at this point, it's right around Labor Day. And so there's no way for me to do any kind of flip that doesn't start at Katahdin.
Sure.
And
was it important for you to finish at Katahdin, by the way?
Yes, it was extremely important, because I had never seen Katahdin before, and I'd built up the mountain and the sign itself in my head. If for the last 3 years, it's basically lived in my head rent free. dreams and nightmares alike, constantly thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so it was really, really important for me to finish at the sign. And I just thought about it, went back and forth for about a week, and then ultimately decided that I was going to hike the Vermont Long Trail as a way to sort of recover my body and prove to myself that, yes, you can still do this kind of thing. Before I would go back out and do it. That was also another factor, was I was kind of worried that I was going to be that I would hit Katahdin and then go into the 100-mile wilderness with no ability to get out and be injured again.
Yeah. So you went to the long trail. Were you better, or were you still healing?
I was better enough to be able to do the long trail. The first 100 miles was sort of a rehab for me.
Sure.
It took me, I think, like 15 or 16 days to do those first 100 miles, which definitely is a lot of days to do that.
Yeah.
But I was just so adamant that I was not going to get hurt again. I was not going to let an injury take me off this trail. And I didn't have a job lined up afterwards, so I've had as much time as I wanted, and I had my whole AT budget, which I did not plan to spend on the long trail, but still, just like, I didn't have those limitations, and so I was able to just take my time and focus on not getting injured for those first 100 miles. And honestly, those are some of my favorite hiking I've ever done.
Nice.
Because I was able to take my time so much and go into all the towns and I think I stayed in every town first 100 miles except Manchester. I think I zeroed in Bennington, and I know I went into Manchester and the Stratton. I stayed at a hostel. I zeroed at a hostel because it was going to rain the next day, which honestly ended up being great because I was able to do the Stratton Tower.
That's right.
Like with a perfect clear day, and it was really great.
Was there any doubt that you'd go back in 24?
No,
but
as soon as I made it to Rutland and those first 100 miles, I knew that if I could make the next 170 miles without injury, I was going to find a way to go back to Georgia and do it again.
So was that because you'd enjoyed it so much, or was it because you just didn't like the way it ended?
Both, I guess. I enjoyed every single second of 2023. I never got any kind of Virginia blues or regret or feelings of sadness. Like, every single minute in 23 was spectacular.
Except for those last 12 miles.
Except for those last 12 miles.
Yeah, terrible. So the other important thing, which when we spoke the other day, I'd forgotten, and I hadn't really connected the dots. As you'd gone to the long trail and you spent your AT budget, what did you do, if you don't mind me asking, to budget for 2024?
Well, thankfully, even though I definitely spent way more than I should have on the long trail, I didn't spend everything. Right. So I still had a little bit left over. And so I spent the winter, I stayed at home and ended up working at a restaurant for a few months just to, and basically did the exact same thing that I had done back in 2023, which was I saved up every single dollar, sacrificed everything, didn't make friends with any of my coworkers because I knew they'd want to hang out with me outside of work and spend money. And so it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was a very lonely winter.
So you took this sad loner back to the trail, did you?
Exactly. But honestly, it was kind of great because then you got to go back to the trail community, and I was able to be completely open and be friends with everybody because I had been pent up for so long.
I bet you're a bloody nightmare talking to everybody. Yeah. So
pretty much all the way to Damascus. Yeah.
So from your experience in 2023, did you make changes to your gear the following year, or did you pretty much go with the same stuff?
I kind of follow the same methodology, but there was definitely some different gear that I went with. I got a new backpack. I got a new sleeping pad, a new sleeping bag, just like some small changes here or there, just lose a couple pounds. I think my base weight was 11 before I finished the Smokies. And then once I mailed home my pants and my puffy jacket and my other pair of rain pants, I think I dropped down to below 10 pounds.
Wow,
and so
that's great.
I tried not to talk about it on the trail because I didn't want to be one of those people who talks about how ultralight they are.
You can't help yourself. You can't help yourself. People do it all the time.
Yeah. Whenever someone would talk about their pack, then I would mention it, but I would really try to avoid mentioning it first.
And in those early miles, I guess you must be nervous still about your tendonitis. Did you get any trouble with it, or were you then completely healed by then?
I think I was pretty much completely healed at that point.
And you started in the middle of April 2024. Why did you choose to go so relatively late? Because and funnily enough, we'll be telling everybody in a minute what happened. But why did you go in late April?
So I went in late April for a couple different reasons. One, I really wanted to experience fall in New England.
Nice.
When I did the Long Trail, I passed through there from Labor Day to early October, and it was just so spectacular. Like northern Vermont in the fall leaves was one of the prettiest places I've been to, and I had hiked in the Adirondacks in the fall as well, so I'd experienced a little bit of that fall in New England, but I wanted to really experience it and pass through New Hampshire and Maine during those times. So that was probably the first reason. The second reason was, to be honest, I just didn't have enough money at that time because I had spent the money on the Long Trail and working in a restaurant, like it can pay money, but I was making a lot more money when I was working for the state than I was in the restaurant. So that just kind of happens. I just didn't have the cash until then. So
you set out. Was it quite quiet, I suppose? Was there any sort of bubble at all?
I wouldn't call it a bubble so much. There was definitely a solid group of people who I saw consistently, but certainly no like AT bubble, mythical, drink the rivers dry and every single shelter is full and there's cat holes everywhere. Nothing quite like that.
Yeah.
I'd say there was maybe
the toilet paper minefield.
The toilet. Well, there was the toilet paper hill right before Blood Mountain at Lance Creek that I to this day kind of haunts me a little bit, knowing that I drank water from the creek after I saw that because I didn't have a choice. But yeah, no, I would say maybe 20 or 30 people that I would see on a somewhat regular basis. At least for Georgia, and then after Georgia, people kind of fell off. Like between mile 100 and Damascus, I was more or less sticking with the same 5, 6, 7 people right. All the way.
Now I've been on the AT on 2 through hikes, and they were both so different. And I know yours ended differently, both of yours. But how different were your 2 hikes, if at all? Do you get the same sort of vibe the second time around, or did you suddenly feel at home the second time around because you knew what you were meant to be doing?
I definitely felt more comfortable the second time around. The first time around, it sort of felt like my first day at college. Like everything was new. There's all these new people. Oh my God, everybody has the same interests as me. This is so awesome, and it was just so exciting. Whereas the second time, I definitely felt more at home, and it was like, okay, I remember how to thru hike. It's been a few months, but backpacking is easy, and it's really I just felt way more comfortable.
So you reached Monson, which is always a fantastic place to reach because you're nearly there. You got the 100-mile wilderness coming up. It's so exciting, and people, when I was there, they tended to stop in Monson for a zero, and more people would join, and you'd have this great feeling before you went into the wilderness. Were you confident that Katahdin would be open when you got there?
When I got to Monson, I was confident that it would be open. There was only one weather window in the next handful of days, and the mountain had been open to that point. And all of the research that I had done, and even the year before, it closed, I think, on the 22nd of October, and so it had just kept closing later and later every year. Right. And so I figured, it's not a big deal. But I had gotten a few texts from people who had summited before me saying, you should do it quickly. If you haven't flipped already, you should go up and just do it and just get it done with. But I was just like so committed to finishing on Katahdin. And after everything I had done and literally postponing my hike to the following year so I could finish on Katahdin, that was what I wanted to do. And so I was pretty confident. But unfortunately, that rainstorm ended up getting pushed back a day and became so much worse than it was supposed to be predicted to be. And for whatever reason, it didn't occur to me that, the 100-mile wilderness is maybe 500-600 feet, that if it's raining for about 16 hours straight and it's a lot of rain at 5,000 feet, it's probably snowing.
Yeah.
And so all of that rain that had hit me from that big storm that I was kind of worried about ended up being snow. And that snowstorm was ultimately what closed the mountain.
When did you find out it was closed?
The first time I saw it.
No.
Yeah, so I got to the I can't remember the name of it, but there's one last like hill in the 100-mile wilderness, and on one side you can look back and see all the way back to the Bigelows and think about, I just walked through the 100-mile wilderness, it's over, and then you turn around and you see Katahdin for the first time, and it's this spectacular thing. And I remember I had tears in my eyes as I'm looking at it finally after so long. And then I pulled my phone out and I had service, and I was getting texts from friends saying that they had closed the mountain, and I'm like, oh no, they didn't close the mountain. What are you talking about? And then sure enough, I went on Baxter's website and it was closed. And then the tears in my eyes, they were still there, but for a very different reason.
Oh my God! So what is the situation? Well, you're not allowed to go up it, or it's too dangerous. What did you consider still going up?
I mean, the consideration was definitely there, but Baxter takes their conservation very
Sure,
seriously.
that's right.
And I have heard of people in the past getting ejected from the park for attempting that, and so I just didn't even want to bother with that.
Wow.
And ultimately, they did close it for a reason, and it has to do with the alpine vegetation on the summit. Basically, once you get on the actual saddle or tabletop, between the rock scramble and the summit itself,
Tablelands.
There's tablelands. There's so much alpine vegetation there, and the trail is so narrow with the little tiny string that runs along it. And so when there's a bunch of snow, you can't really see that string. And before the winter, the ground isn't frozen enough, and there's not enough snow to pack on top of that vegetation, so you can just trample it really easily. And if it's snowing, you get lost, and now you're just crushing everything that's taken longer to grow than either of us have been alive. Like it's a big deal, and so that's why they closed it early. And also obviously for safety reasons.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's not like AT hikers are not well known for carrying extra warm weather stuff for a summit when it's -5.
But that wasn't the end of it, was it? Tell us what your plan was, and when did that plan start to form?
Between the top of that hill and me leaving the 100-mile wilderness, I went through every stage of grief as fast as I possibly could. I've never grieved so fast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then ultimately I got to the bargaining stage of that grief process, and instead of trying to find a way to justify it, I justified a way to come back and do it anyway. And so I started thinking like, oh well, I know they let people up in the winter, and at this point I had signed on to work for a ski resort in Maine.
Right.
And so I was like, well, I'm going to be here anyway, and I'm going to learn how to live in the cold and be in the cold and work in the cold. So why don't I just do it in the winter? And I've always wanted to do kind of more mountaineering stuff and get more interested in that. Seven Summits has always been a goal of mine. So this seemed like a good opportunity to just start. And so by the time I got to the road, I made up my mind that if I could summit in December, I was going to summit in December before the end of the year. And if not, then early January or something like that. And it just so happened to work out that there was a bunch of other people who were stuck in Monson waiting for it to open, and ultimately didn't open. And so I was able to talk to them, and we formed a little group, and we were able to go up at mid-December.
That's just amazing. Because I want you to talk us through that climb, which, as I said earlier, gave you one of the best finishing pictures I've ever seen. It was just amazing. So tell us what happened that day.
Sure. So we woke up a little late, and one of us just cannot leave camp early. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone but myself, because it was me. I even with a goal like that, still struggled to get up and leave early. So we left right around first light. I think it was about 6:15, 6:20, something like that. So honestly, kind of a little bit late for a winter hike, just because it was going to take so much longer. But a few days before that, it had rained a lot, and then it warmed up dramatically. Like highs in the 60s.
Wow.
So super, super warm for a Maine winter, especially that far north in Maine. Sure. And so I was under the impression that a lot of that snow had probably left, and so we weren't going to really have that much of an obstacle until we got to the exposed rock scramble anyway. So it wasn't that big of a deal if we left an hour late, not whatever. But so we leave camp. The first mile to Katahdin Stream Falls there was no snow on the ground.
Nice.
It was completely clear.
Nice.
And I thought that was a really great sign. And we got to the falls, and it was really pretty. And I filled up my water and kept hiking. And then almost immediately after the falls, there were four of us, and we all started hiking at our own pace. And then we were all going to meet at the top, or not at the top, right at the rock scramble.
Yep.
And so everyone's hiking at their own pace, and now I'm charging through snow, and then the snow clears, and I think it's going to be the same thing again. It's going to be a great environment to hike in, can go super fast, and then I see just this massive sheet of ice across the entire trail, literally the width of the trail, just layers upon layers upon layers of ice. I had described it as black ice, but someone brought a really interesting point to me that if it's layers of black ice and you can see it, is it really black ice anymore? And so I'm not really, I don't really know how I feel about that, but yeah, it was basically the consistency of black ice, just layers of it, probably 2 or 3 inches thick, just the whole trail. And so that slowed me down significantly,
Of course.
trying to go up that. Originally,
You had spikes, I presume, did you?
I did have spikes, but funnily enough, I was, I don't know what possessed me to think this, but I was convinced that if I put the crampons on, then it was going to be like ice skates, and I was going to have less surface area, and then I was going to slide more, and it would be worse, which is just really dumb because that's literally what crampons are for.
Yes.
So I had them strapped to my back. I did have an ice axe, and so I was able to use the ice axe, and I would put basically one hand on the ice axe.
Would have been great if you'd fallen onto your back then, wouldn't it? You'd have been okay if you'd fallen onto your back.
Yeah, I could have easily self-arrested.
There you go.
So I was grabbing the tree with one hand and using the ice axe in the other hand, and just kind of hobbling for, I think it was about 1.5 miles or 2 miles, before we hit a snow line, which was basically like a probably 0.5 mile of post holing uphill, super steep.
Yeah.
So that was really kind of awkward to get up there, but it wasn't too bad. And then finally hit the actual part that I was so worried about, the rock scramble, and finally got the first view of the wide open expanse in the 100-mile wilderness, and it was so breathtaking and spectacular, and it was right around that time that the sun had really fully come up, and it was just warming, and it felt fantastic, and it was a great moment. And then the rock scramble was honestly a lot of fun. I'm not a big fan of New England hiking, to tell you the truth. I'm a much bigger fan of switchbacks and kind of West Coast hiking. But just like knowing what I was in for, I was able to go into it with the right mindset, and just had an absolute blast going up it. There was one point where we went the wrong way. We went right when we should have gone left through this little chute, and we went around it because we just couldn't really see it. The snow had sort of covered this arrow that was pointing the direction that we were supposed to go.
Sure.
And so we went up this incredibly steep pitch, using the ice axe and hoisting ourselves and reaching, and it was this whole ordeal. And so that was a lot of fun. And then realizing that we'd gone the wrong way was I don't know, it definitely made it seem more adventurous.
Yes, I'm sure. Yes.
And so yeah, we were doing that for a good long while, just having a great time. But that did take about, I think, 2 hours to finally get to the tabletop. And so we were way, way behind schedule, but it didn't really matter, because as soon as I got up to the false summit, and I saw one of our people in our group said it was only 1.5 miles to the summit, and I was confused. Like, how is it only 1.5 miles? Like, where is it? And I pointed over to Pomola Peak, and I said, "Oh, is that it over there? Way off in the distance?" And he said, "No, it's that." And I looked over to my left and saw that it was right there.
Oh.
Like, it was, just being able to literally see the finish was such an emotional moment.
Sure.
And to this day, I still think about that first time that I saw the actual summit. And it was so spectacular. But then the tabletop, ironically, I think was more challenging than the rock scramble.
Really?
Because
Wow.
because of all that rain that had happened, pushed all the snow either off the mountain or just down, and just sat and pooled over the snow.
Right.
And so there was no snow on the summit. It was all ice, just a sheet of ice as far as you could see.
It looked it.
And so it was kind of uncomfortable and slow going, even though it was flat. To be able to just walk was exhausting. And just like just thinking about it now, my knees hurt from just having to walk so carefully for such a long stretch. But it really honestly didn't matter once I passed the falls or the spring, and it was only 1 mile, and then kept getting closer and closer and closer, and then finally getting to the last little like rocky hill, climbing that, and then there was no more rocks, and it was just a smooth sheet of ice all the way up to the summit. And I looked up and to the right, and I could see two of the people I'd hiked with had already made it to the summit, and to the left of them, I saw the piece of wood that I had been thinking about for so long, and I 100% started crying as I'm going up this hill, and I'm trying to keep it together, just so that honestly, so that the tears don't freeze to my face, and so that I can see straight. And it was like such an emotional moment, just slowly climbing the ice over and over and over again, just one step after the other, and then finally getting to the summit, and the two people who had already been up there were cheering, and just finally getting to touch the sign was just a spectacular experience.
I'm sure it was. And when you were done after 2 years of actually literally chasing Katahdin, it was obviously worth it. Was it enough though for you?
That's a great question. I in that moment, I think it felt like enough. But of course, over time, as you get further and further removed, you start to question what's next.
Yeah.
Could I do something like that again? And so I keep going back and forth over whether or not I would want to do something like that again. I talked earlier about doing the 7 summits. I think something like that would definitely be a bit more achievable than this other goal that I have, which would be to potentially hike all of the national scenic trails in the U.S.
All 11.
All 11 of them.
That's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot. And so even though it's long distance hiking, so it wouldn't be quite as expensive as something like the 7 summits or, other things of that nature, it is just such a massive time constraint. There's so many long hikes in the U.S., like between the North Country Trail, which is almost 5,000 miles, or the Continental Divide, which is 3, or the PCT, which is 26. Like there's just so many miles. And so, I keep going back and forth about whether or not I would want to do that.
But Nick, yours was such a passion for you to do. This Appalachian Trail hike is as epic as a story as I've heard about it, because finishing the way in which you did and having had to get off the year before, I would think it should be enough. You may want to do other things, great, but this should satisfy you, and the feeling of accomplishment must be so great. I admire somebody who wants it so much they just can almost taste it, and they just carry on and carry on and carry on, and just determined to see it from south to north and see Katahdin at the end. You did it. At the end of the day, you did it. It was tough to do, but you did it. So I suppose the question is what's next, but I know what you're doing next. You're moving to the U.S. Virgin Islands, aren't you?
Yep. So I was working at a ski resort in Maine for the first half of the winter, and now I was making snow, and we've opened up every single trail. And so I felt like it was a great time to get out and go do something else, and variety is the spice of life. And so one of my good friends who I met on the Appalachian Trail is living in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and so she was able to secure me a job and basically helped me figure out housing and everything. And so I'm really looking forward to going down there and seeing what the next chapter of my life is going to look like.
Well, I tell you what, I'm so pleased you agreed to come on and share what that first chapter was like, because that was a great story. And I just want to wish you well in the future, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story with us. If you do another big one, let me know.
I definitely will, and I'm so happy that you reached out to me and we were able to get this going. I'm really happy to be on here.
Thank you, buddy. Will you take it easy, okay?
You too.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
What a terrific young man, eh? He looks so young in his pictures, but he has a calmness about him that I found kind of mesmerising. As I said in the beginning, he made a lot of intelligent choices that worked out for him in the end. I loved that he felt better enough to go back to do the long trail. That fervour to get this trail licked drove him forward, and as I say, his is one of the best Katahdin pictures I've ever seen. As you heard, he really earned it. Now, news of what's coming up. Our Mighty Blue Class of 2025 is just about to start. Next week, we'll have the first of 4 consecutive chats with Dave Santee, who's heading out in early March. So we're going to go through a lot of his preparation with his gear in the spotlight next week as we do our own shakedown. If you have a question for Dave, and later Beth, who starts exactly a month later, just email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and I'll ask them. And remember, you can always leave me a voicemail on our hikingradionetwork.com website. Just click on the microphone on the site and record your question. I'll probably play it on the show. Thanks, as ever, goes to our terrific donors. This week I have to thank monthly donors Ann Dobson, Dave Santee, Mike Cicello, Alan Troy, Jens Lipperheider, Lisa Rana, Brian Hilton Jr., Woody Bass and Paul Chevelle. Additionally, we got 2 generous donations. One was from Michael Riley, who wrote with his donation, "Do the Camino podcast, please." That was a quick return, Michael. And Audrey Scanlon sent me an email explaining her generous donation. She told me about recovery from her foot surgery and how our guests have motivated her to get back on track with her own hiking. Good to hear from you, Audrey. I hope you get better and better. Finally today, Emily's little tramily has expanded as she's about to hit the New Hampshire border. Always a great day. I'll see you next week. Chapter 24. Happy Anniversary. By mid-July, I had slowed my pace and lessened the distance for each day, which rewarded me with feet that did not hurt. It was a little miracle. I can't even begin to express my appreciation for feet that didn't scream at me with every step. I stopped complaining about it because everyone has sore feet, but mine, I do believe, were out of the ordinary. The last few days have been pain-free, and I was loving it. It was a good time to have happy feet because I did push on for one last 20-miler. I needed the stars to align if I wanted to be able to spend a night in a hotel with Batman for our 25th anniversary. In order for that to happen, Why Not and I had to do 20.5 miles to reach Condon Shelter. That would allow Batman to hike south to meet us for a Nero out. We were off to a great start in the morning. Hiking was easy. We even took time to enjoy a snack at the small vista on top of Mount Prospect. It was an easy half-mile climb from a road that we had just crossed. After our power snack, we were off again. I was in the lead. Several steps down the trail, I realised we were on a blue blaze trail. No worries, it was only a few yards. So we backtracked to the vista and headed in the correct direction. The descent from the top was just as easy as the climb up. 15 minutes later, we reached a road. My pride sunk deeper than the valley at the bottom of the vista we had just enjoyed. I had led us half a mile south on the trail. Why Not was so mad at me. Thankfully, he didn't stay that way for long. Forgiveness is easily given among hikers. Neither one of us had recognised the trail from the opposite direction. Back up Mount Prospect we went for the second time. That's just what we needed, more distance on an already long day. That morning we were the blind leading the blind. The mud increased as we continued. We had been warned about the mud in New England, especially in Vermont. Several states have nicknames, and Vermont is known as a Vermud. We were not quite to the state line, but close enough for the mud to smear its way over the border, just like the rocks of Rocksylvania didn't stop at the border of Pennsylvania, but continued up the trail for at least another 30 miles into New Jersey. Our leisurely morning hike increasingly became a mud pit, slowing us down. When we arrived at the shelter, all available tent sites that weren't covered with deep black mud were taken. No worries. Why Not used a hammock, and Batman had planned to show up early to have my tent set up. That was the deal for me doing another 20-miler. But where was my Batman and my tent? Not set up. We found him in the shelter. He had mixed up the flies for the tents. We had 2 tents, a single and a double. When he was drying them out the day before, he accidentally mixed up the rain flies. With rain forecasted, we couldn't tent without it, so he set us up in the shelter. I don't usually like shelters unless they're new, and even then, I prefer to tent. To make matters worse, this shelter was awful. It smelled like stale farts stored in a frat house. Around the base, dangling wire caging meant to keep the porcupines from chewing the wood pricked the back of our legs when we sat down. We could see mice activity, and the hikers already inside were quite annoying. Inside, I was so mad, but I wouldn't let my face show it, because, after all, I didn't have to carry my tent or sleeping bag that day. It was a mistake easily made. How could I be mad? If I was really going to be mad, I could only be mad at myself for not taking responsibility for my own things. If I hadn't slack-packed, then I would have had everything I needed. Who was this person thinking with such reason? Pre-hike, if something like this would have happened, I would have pouted for hours and let Batman know it was his fault. Being on the trail and going through challenges of all sorts have made me realise that blaming anyone was a waste of time and energy. First of all, when I point a finger at someone, there were 3 other fingers pointing back at myself. So for every one incident I want to blame someone for, there are most likely 3 other events where I'm at fault. Just that day, I led Why Not a precious extra mile off course. Crap happens. Sometimes you're at fault, sometimes it's someone else's responsibility. Deal with it and move on. Doing anything else is a waste of time and energy. Sleeping in a shelter is a risky business. After a rain, bugs are out in swarms and you're sharing space with mice, other rodents and hikers. Thankfully, the night came and went without so much as a nibble from flying creatures nor the furry scurriers. Why Not also had an uneventful rest in his hammock. We were packed up and out early so we could make the most of our Nero day. Back at the car, we were excited to get to our accommodations, the Hampton Inn in Bennington, Vermont. A pool and soft beds with crisp sheets awaited us. First stop was breakfast at a roadside diner, Papa Pete's. It didn't look like much from the outside, and the inside had even less appeal, except for the decorations. There was something for each season. They had the whole year covered. Nutcrackers and ornaments for Christmas, hearts for Valentine's Day, shamrocks for St. Paddy's, flags for the 4th of July, and miscellaneous other seasonal items. No time wasted each month on sprucing up the place. It was time well saved. We knew right where they used that time, on the food. The meals were generous and delicious, a great way to start our Nero and Batman's and my 25th anniversary. 25 years ago, I married my best friend. It was a perfect day. Family and friends came from near and far to share it with us. This year, we celebrated at a Hampton Inn with only our new friend, Why Not? After breakfast, we did the usual hiker chores of resupply, laundry, eat more, and rest. Once our tasks were done, the three of us hung out at the pool. Why Not claimed a chair across the pool from us, working on a project I thought was for his feet. Bruce and I played musical chairs between the hot tub, the sauna, and the pool. Once we had our fill of relaxing, which came way past hiking midnight, we headed up to the room. Why Not handed Bruce and I something. It was a beautiful anniversary card. Inside was a hand-carved piece of wood in the shape of a heart. When I saw it, I teared up. I knew exactly where it came from. On the previous day's hike, we came upon a felled beech tree alongside the trail. Someone had attempted to chop the log in half without much success. Their chipping away exposed the inner beauty of the hardwood. The chopping had spewed small pieces of wood around like puzzle pieces scattered on a carpet. For a brief moment, we both had stopped to enjoy the markings carved out by the hacker. I remember running my fingers over the wood and saying, what a shame this tree couldn't be hauled out to be made into something beautiful. Little did I know, someone was carrying a sample out to do just that. Why Not secretly grabbed a piece of the puzzle and created his own masterpiece for us. Just another form of trail magic. Why Not and I were melding nicely as we continued up the trail. I no longer felt the need for security in another hiker, but it was nice to have him around. We were developing a brother-sister bond that was filled with teasing, taunting, and caring moments. I teased him about being blind, he teased me about other things, but we took care of each other. After a few days, Why Not was trying to walk off a rolled ankle when he decided enough was enough. It was time to have it checked out. Batman and I reached out to various family members who were in the area. My big brother John and his wife Elizabeth answered the call. It's so great to be out on the trail, living life on your own, experiencing things you have never done before, but when it's all said and done, nothing beats family. It was family that was there when we most needed it. Bruce drove us the extra long distance while Why Not and I took advantage of the downtime and rested in the vehicle. Once at John's house, we did the usual hiker chores. The next day, Bruce took Why Not to a clinic and I made spaghetti sauce. John and Elizabeth loved my sauce. It was the least I could do to repay them for the impromptu visit. Why Not's diagnosis was a sprain. He decided one day's rest was enough. We were back on the trail in no time. From that point on, things began to change. Our charming teasing became more like an old married couple's bantering. I began setting out earlier without him in the mornings, and that was okay. I needed earlier starts to get the miles in, and he needed more daylight to see. I liked our friendship, and I didn't want to ruin it by forcing trail compatibility. So we hiked on separately, meeting up at breaks or at the end of the day, and sometimes not at all. Vermont wasn't all bad. Yeah, there was the mud. Yes, Why Not and I grew apart, but there were nice hostels, nice venues, and the awesome country stores, little hidden treasures in the middle of nowhere. One particular place was On the Edge Farm, a little market with fresh treats, beverages, and ice cream. Two older gents I had met earlier in the day told me about the store. I didn't usually go off trail. My feet didn't like to do any more than what was needed, but I convinced myself that the ice cream would be good for the pain. I thought a scoop of the creamy indulgence would be just what the doctor ordered to get me through the day. When I finally left the farm, I'd consumed only one scoop of strawberry ice cream topped with fresh raspberries. But I packed out a Milky Way bar, fresh wax beans, Doritos, and 8 ounces of habanero cheese. I put back the soda. With a little over a month to go on the trail, I was already trying to eliminate poor eating choices. Soda was the first to go, so I thought. That good choice didn't last too long. Later in the afternoon, we had to cross a stream, and our prize on the other side wasn't just being a few yards closer to Katahdin. It was a bucket of stream-chilled sodas. My willpower was left on the south side of the stream. I enjoyed every ounce of the cool, bubbly, caloric, quick energy. When I got to camp, I went right to work setting up. I had to cook. I hadn't done so in a while. I ate mostly cold meals. I didn't like the task of cooking in the evening after a long hike, and with a little sidetrack to the market, I arrived late for me after 5 p.m. I went right to work cutting and cleaning the beans. They cooked while I set up my tent and did my other chores. I feasted on cheesy green beans and rice as the sun set. GQ would have been so proud of me. Exiting Vermont was easy. On our last morning in the Green Mountain State, there were 4 of us now kind of hiking together. Why not the 2 gents and me? Our pre-planned early start was stalled by a soft, constant rain. I lay awake in my sleeping bag longer than usual, listening to the pitter-patter on my tent. We planned to hike out to meet Batman so that we could all slap pack to the New Hampshire border and then start our 0 day. The morning rain slowed our start, but we eventually headed out. It was a wonderful hike, even if the vegetation was all wet. In places where the brush grew close to the trail, it felt as though we were going through a human car wash. We all needed a good rinsing anyway. 5 miles into the hike, we crossed the White River. On the bridge, we heard the sound of a dinner bell, and just like Pavlov's dogs, we drooled. We had been told about Linda and Randy, who cooked for hikers. The 2 watched for hikers crossing the bridge, then sound the bell and beckon them over for a hot meal. We were ushered in, dirty boots and all, to Linda's kitchen, where we sat at an oversized island while plates of pancakes, eggs and sausage were passed around. When we had had our fill, we dismounted our stools just in time for the next round of hungry hikers making their way to the island. It was awesome. The generosity of strangers was amazing, and I never once took it for granted. They never wanted payment. Just a smile and or a hug was all they charged. Batman was parked across the street from Linda and Randy's place. He was taking our gear so we could enjoy yet another day of slacking. I joked how I'm not a fisher of men, but a fisher of hikers, who I bring over to the lighter side. We all threw our gear in Batman's vehicle. Even Wynot caught up to us with his later start. He was in that next round of hungry hikers. The gents and I headed out. We hiked slower than Wynot. New Hampshire, here we come. 7 hot and sweaty miles later, we exited the woods at Elm Street. This was the beginning of a 3.7-mile road walk, the longest road section on the entire AT. The first driveway we came to was stocked with coolers of soda, snacks, and miscellaneous hiker needs. We reclined with beverage in hand as we geared up for the last section of the day, which included crossing into New Hampshire. As we relaxed, a car exited the driveway. We thanked the driver for his gifts, but he was not the homeowner. The driver explained that he lived next door, but if we were interested, he and the homeowner in whose driveway we rested did take in hikers for the night, at no charge. That was the end of our day. The gents cancelled their hotel room and made reservations for the free stay, as well as reserving a spot for Wynot. I chose to go to a hotel with Batman. New Hampshire would have to wait 1 more day or 2. I enjoyed my night with Batman. We had a nice dinner, did laundry, dried my gear and slept in the next day. I was worn out and tired. The weeks had been tough, the climbs longer and harder, but that seemed to be the norm. Apostle Paul even wrote in his book, Hiking Through, that the climbs are either getting tougher or I'm getting weaker. I'm 63 miles from Mount Washington. I don't know how I will feel when I'm closer to being done with this hike, but right now, I'm so ready to be done. I'm just completely worn out right now. Some good news though, only 398.5 miles left. Just a little walk in the park. Years separated my hike from Apostle Paul's, but our feelings were mutual. Since quitting wasn't an option, the only thing to do was to take a break. If a 0 day wasn't possible at the moment, I would quit at the end of the day. I'd just start back up in the morning as if it was a new beginning. Bruce had to head off for a business trip. After our relaxing morning at the hotel, he dropped me off back at Elm Street with the gents. I spent the night there, relaxing more and reviewing some of my reasons to remain on the trail. During my pre-hike planning, someone had advised me to make a list of why I wanted to hike. If I was going to make it to Katahdin, the why had to be more important than anything else in my life at the time. I never thought my why was really important. I just wanted to do it. And then once I say I'm going to do something, I do it. It was really that simple. As time went on, that was still my driving force, but other reasons became strong contenders. The biggest one was that this hike was no longer about me, but for my followers. I had many friends, family and strangers reading my blog and living life on the trail vicariously through me. There was no way I was going to let them down. If I didn't finish, they didn't finish. I was not going to do that to them. Day after day, I would dig deep to find the strength and grit through the pain and tiredness to make it through the next day so I could write the next post. It was no longer my hike. It was our hike.